It's May 7th, 1487, and another remarkable event is about to be uncovered by Arion, Rebecca, and Olly, the Retrospectors.
Isabella I was by any measure a busy queen. Not only did she unify Spain through her marriage to Ferdinand II of Aragon, but also she financed the expedition of Christopher Columbus leading to the discovery of the Americas, completed the Reconquista, and infamously expelled both Jews and Muslims from her kingdom, all the while empowering the Spanish Inquisition. But amid all that, she also found time to come up with ambulances. Yes, the flashy sirened helpy vehicles we all know today, which were first seen in any significant number today in history in 1487 when a line of them rolled into the Moorish citadel at Malaga to collect the wounded after a major battle.
Yeah, it won't surprise those of you who are paying attention that in 1487 Queen Isabella didn't quite come up with the flashy light siren vehicle things. Her version of ambulancias, as they were called, was actually initially the word that they used in Spanish for the tent hospitals themselves that people would be taken to from the military battlefield, not the vehicles that got you there. But it was her idea to have some sort of vehicle that could take you to these tent hospitals that could move along with the land that hopefully was being reclaimed from the Moors during the war.
The word ambulancia was used 10 years before in another siege in the same conflict, but it's not exactly clear in what context it's being used. They're probably just referring to the logistical wagons which carried all of the hospital supplies. This is the first explicit use of a fleet of ambulances to collect people from the battlefield, although they weren't used during battle. That would come hundreds of years later. This was just wait for all the dust to settle, and then we go out and see who's still alive, see who made it. But even so, it might sound a little bit primitive from our perspective now, but at the time it was a huge breakthrough in battlefield medicine generally. This was before then. You basically had to rely on maybe somebody you knew passing by on the battlefield that might carry you to safety, or maybe someone on a horse that could give you a ride if you couldn't move. This campaign, particularly the campaign to drive the Moorish rulers out of Spain, it was really well funded because it was seen as this cause across Christian Europe. So it was very well funded. Isabella and Ferdinand were the ultimate medieval power couple. So there were loads of resources going into this, which meant that they could have luxuries like something approximating a field hospital. This campaign is where we get some of the first detailed reports of battlefield medicine at all. Doctors and surgeons on hand with medical supplies. And ironically, a lot of what was being put into practice in these hospitals was probably gleaned from the Moors. It was the Muslim world that was at the cutting edge of medicine and hospitals as we know them now, not just somewhere where you'd dump sick people so that monks could, feed them soup to see if they lived or died.
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? That the idea of taking sick or injured people away from where they currently are to a place where people can help them is hardly new. There's at any point in history that would have been the most sensible thing to do with someone who's in that sort of a state. But what was new, exactly as you're saying, Rebecca, was the way that this, particularly the first idea of ambulancia being a kind of a field hospital that gave good treatment to the wounded of your own side, and that was partly a means to try to attract volunteers to the army itself. And having the idea that there's this perk of a place that you'll be taken in the event.
You'll die with a leech on your leg.
Exactly.
With a sword. You guys are going to put a bandage on it. Sign me up.
I just want someone to trepan me, make a big hole in my head and do what you can. But that is sort of what it was. It was designed as I suppose also because we're in the age of pre-modern medicine, and there's not a lot that doctors could even necessarily do for you once they got you to your field hospital. But the idea was very humane, with these bedded wagons that were comfortable and they had an awning so the sun wasn't beating down on you. That seemed very civilized.
Yeah, but that propaganda point's really important, I think, because we are actually 700 years into this war between Spain and the Moors for control of the Iberian Peninsula. So they've had lots of time to work out strategy, but also it really is important for her that it's being framed theologically, right? So you're doing this not just for your country, you're doing it for your religion, for your people, for your civilization.
Yeah.
Look how we're different to the Muslims, she's basically saying to the Spanish, isn't she?
Right. We
look after our soldiers and we take them back to these tent hospitals, not like those brutes out there. That's why we need to reclaim this land. So, there's a real propagandic purpose behind it, as well as actually just the military advantage of being able to repair your soldiers and send them back out again. I mean, one of the reasons this didn't happen in such an organised way before, I suspect, is people didn't really care. I mean, life was expendable. You just get, what's the point of having a soldier with one leg? Just let him die and then we'll get another one.
Yeah, I mean, she also visited the hospitals herself, which now would be seen as, a classic PR coup, a great photo opportunity. But in those times, was apparently very much in defiance of court etiquette. She was advised not to do it. And
some cracking etchings of it.
Yes, quite. She was apparently told not to do this. It wouldn't do for her to be seen visiting these places full of sick men who could be of any class. But she reportedly told courtiers, "Let me alone. These poor people have here no other mother to lighten their sufferings." And I mean, that could easily have been PR too. I mean, the whole affair of the ambulances and the field hospitals was made much of. There was a public report made in front of the Pope in November, which described the wagons themselves, the ambulances, and saying, "In these, at the Queen's outlay, was found everything to the art of medicine and of surgery." And when the Spanish forces entered Malaga, the ambulances, all 400 of them, were part of this triumphant procession into the city. So this whole notion of the ambulances was folded into the triumph of the reconquest of Malaga.
Mind you, it's worth saying that these vehicles were not being configured for the comfort of the patients like they might be now. Sometimes they'd be led by 40 horses. You'd have stacks of men piled on top of each other. It was just chuck them in the back and get them along. It wasn't high-tech, this. But it did mean that people could get cutting-edge treatment like dog fat and scorpion oil and amputation as soon as possible.
Well, then it's sort of around Napoleon's era that ambulance technology starts to move on. And in the late 1700s, a chap called Dominique Jean Larrey, who was a French surgeon, he worked on battlefields and himself being a soldier recognized the urgent need for prompt medical care, that people can't just sit around until the fighting stops. They really need to be evacuated as soon as possible. And so his idea was instead you have these really lightweight two-wheeled vehicles that could transport both injured and surgeons directly to the battlefield. And the vehicles were called flying ambulances because they remained with the flying artillery on the front line.
And then you see them being used, or something a bit like them being used, in the battlefield of the American Civil War. But again, pretty grim. I mean, the soldiers there called them avalanches and gut busters because you had to be held in place, perhaps missing a limb. You're rolling all over the floor, going at great speed. I mean, there's this poem that was published in Vanity Fair in 1861. "Let the broad column of men advance, we follow behind with the ambulance," kind of rhymes. "Through rattling bullets and clashing steel, we steadily guide the leaping wheel. Writhing in agony they lie, cursing the ambulance, praying to die." And that's how it was seen. It wasn't what we think of now as like, oh, the paramedics are here and I'm going to get better on board. That was not the case.
And the way that we got to the modern ambulance is kind of a bit of an amalgam of this American Civil War, quite brutal and unpleasant experience, and this sort of very rarefied novelty experience that you could have if you were a wealthy cholera patient in London. And it all came about through a Civil War veteran, a surgeon called Edward Dalton, and he came up basically with the first modern ambulance system. The idea that you could contact the hospital and the hospital would send one to you. Of course, this is in the days for 999 or 911, so you had to get directly in touch with the hospital if you wanted an ambulance. He came up with this system for Bellevue Hospital in New York. Inside would be everything that you needed to treat people at the time, your bandages, your splints, and of course, it being the 1860s, your whiskey, your morphine, your brandy.
I saw that list of stuff, and the one thing you haven't listed was the stomach pump. And I was like, is that just in case too much morphine and brandy
too much whiskey, and then we start again, guys.
Yeah.
Well, let's just try this from the beginning. The other cool thing that his system had was that they had this pulley system that could drop a harness directly onto the horses so that they could leave within 30 seconds of being ordered.
And then it did take the Americans to develop an automobile-based ambulance, one not reliant on horsepower. The first mass production one was in 1909, produced by the James Cunningham and Son Company of Rochester, New York. And you do not need to know that it's in the lineage of that company that they were previously a manufacturer of carriages and hearses to see how they have adapted their previous designs.
Yeah.
Because honestly, if someone asked you to lie down in that, you would assume they're about to bury you in the ground. It is a hearse with a carriage
Well, I
on
mean,
top.
I guess, it could work. How taxis have got the little flag on the side, if you're taking someone to the hospital and it doesn't go well, you just kind of switch into hearse
Turn
mode.
around? Yeah. Switch to hearse mode, yeah.
Now,
This episode first aired last year exclusively to members of Club Retrospectors.
Join today and unlock a new episode this Sunday.
Patreon.com/Retrospectors!